Today we're going to be making a recipe from the King Arthur Flour Cookie Companion Cookbook. And to start off the recipe, we're going to be using food processor. The recipe actually asks for us to do most of the work by hand using a pastry blender, which is an interesting looking tool that has wire pieces strung about, but I find it a lot easier to use a food processor. So I'm going to make some substitutions to the original recipe so that I can use agave nectar as a sweetener instead of sugar. We haven't gotten to the substitution part. This is regular all-purpose flour. It's a half a cup. Put that in the food processor. This is our substitution flour. It's a half a cup of organic coconut flour. And coconut flour is very high in lovely fiber, helpful to your diet, really great stuff, and it tastes fantastic, and it smells really good too. The other advantage of using coconut flour is that, there's some flour left in here, it allows us to use agave nectar in a 1-to-1 ratio instead of using less than we normally would for sugar. And this is white whole wheat flour. And I'm using this instead of regular whole wheat flour because it's got a lighter texture and a lighter color. And because I didn't have any regular whole wheat flour in the house. Okay, and here is a half a teaspoon of salt. It's sea salt. And this is 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and it's sifted. I also sifted the coconut flour because I keep it in the freezer and it tends to get clumpy. I sifted baking flour because it also tends to get clumpy. Okay, I'm going to stick this on the food processor. I'm going to power burst it a few times. Okay, that was just to combine the flour. And next, we're going to add our butter. This is not for the healthy. It's 1 stick of unsalted butter. And this is what you would use the pastry cutter for if you're doing it outside of the food processor. And what I'm going to do now is turn the speed of my food processor all the way down to the lowest speed. And we want to look for a meal type of texture, sort of crumbly. So we're getting closer to that texture. Okay, I think we're just about there. And now, I'm going to move this aside for just a moment. I'm going to combine my agave nectar with 2 tablespoons of cold milk, and you can use whatever kind of milk you want for this. I think we're using 1% milk for this. And I'm combining it together so that it will not have to work so hard to be dispersed in our flour mixture. It also thins out the agave nectar a little bit. Just a tip for when you're using agave nectar, it's very sticky stuff. It's got the consistency of honey, and if you want it to get to pour easily out of your measuring cups, spray them lightly with a flavorless cooking oil. I usually use grapeseed oil for this purpose. Oh, before we do that, I almost forgot to add our cinnamon. This is a particularly strong cinnamon. It's a Vietnamese cinnamon from the Penzeys people. They make really great stuff, and it's so potent. It's so potent that you don't have to use the amount called for in the recipe, but I always do because I really like things very cinnamony. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is slowly add this to our mixture, probably about a tablespoon at a time. Another tablespoon there. And the dough is going to start to come together. already see it on the bottom starting to come together, so what I'm going to do is pause for a moment and lift the collected material off the bottom of the food processor. Okay, we've lifted off a bit of the stuck material at the bottom, and you can see it's gotten more clumpy. And what I'm going to do now is add a bit more of the liquid ingredients and blend it up a little bit more. The reason why I'm using the power burst technique rather than just leaving it on the food processor is because you have a better control over the ingredients and what happens to them. So it's really starting to clump together. And add a little bit more. It's probably going to be a bit wetter than the original recipe because we're using a liquid sugar, but I'm sure it'll work out just fine. Okay, one more go of the liquid, and maybe I'll get a spatula and clean out the rest of that while this is blending up a little bit. And put this on. That's working hard, you can tell. Okay, it's starting to do that great thing that dough does where it collects itself and it moves around. And I'm going to just put the remaining agave nectar in there. See what happens. I think what we're going to need to do now, besides clean up a bit of mess, is take all this dough out, give it a nice light kneading, just a little bit of kneading, fold it over a few times on itself, fold it over the other way, and adding a little bit of flour just to make it into a good dough that we can work with. So we'll be right back after I clean all this all out. Okay, we've taken our dough out of the food processor, and it has a wonderful soft quality to it, and this is a very well floured surface, and I'm just going to give it a really light kneading. And the recipe, oops, see, it's getting sticky. The recipe asks us to divide the dough in half, so you can let one half rest while you work with the other half. So the reason why we need it, why we K-N-E-A-D it, is so that it can obtain a nice flaky texture. And to make sure, you know, the butter's all together and all the ingredients are adequately mixed. It's still pretty sticky dough. So what I'm going to do next is divide this in half, wash my hands so I can work with the camera, and I'm going to roll out the dough, the half of dough. Actually, let's divide it in half now while the hands are still sticky. And we can add these back in, mix them in. I might just need some more flour. What we're going to do is we're going to roll out the dough on parchment paper so we don't have to transfer it from a sticky surface to the surface that we're going to bake it on. We're going to bake it right on that same parchment paper.